A ripple in space, so subtle it was almost imperceptible, distorted the light from distant stars. Admiral Zatak of the Vryn Dominion watched from the bridge of his warship, Dread Harbinger, as his fleet, a vast layered armada of heavy dreadnoughts, planetary bombardment platforms, and swarm fight. The last coalition stronghold, a fragile, dying world named Velethus Prime, lay below, its defenses flickering like the embers of a dying fire. Victory was a formality now. Then it happened. The fabric of space twisted, folded in on itself, and from the darkness emerged a fleet, small, silent, utterly unremarkable. The ships were sleek matte black with no glowing energy cores, no massive spinal cannons, no sprawling formations that signified military dominance. They were insignificant. Who would dare enter this battle now? The coalition had no reinforcements left. The scattered remnants of their forces had been systematically crushed. And yet, these ships, unregistered, unannounced, had just arrived. No known signatures, no standard configurations. They were unreadable, their energy profiles fluctuating as if deliberately obfuscating their true output. The AI tagged them as unknown, a designation the Vryn Dominion had not encountered in centuries of conquest. Zatak sneered. Some lost mercenary fleet, perhaps, or scavengers hoping to pick up the remains. He turned to his second-in-command, Commander Vec, hailed them a sharp trill. Then, a response text only appearing on the main display. This engagement is now under human jurisdiction. Stand down. A beat of silence. Humans, those backwater primitives, tolerated as a minor trade species, had no jurisdiction over anything beyond their own minor systems. Their technology was decades behind even the weakest coalition forces. The idea that they would intervene in a full-scale Dominion conquest was laughable. He leaned forward, voice laced with contempt. You are irrelevant. Depart, or be annihilated. Instead, the Dominion's sensors flickered. Then, they died. Bridge officers barked in alarm as the vast Dominion war net an interconnected system of AI-driven targeting, fleet coordination, and battlefield oversight went dark. Weapons systems powered down. Shield generators flickered. The once invincible armada, poised for planetary extermination, suddenly floated in the void, blind, disarmed, and vulnerable. Admiral Zatak felt something unfamiliar coil in his chest. Not anger. The Dominion did not fight with elegancy or subtlety. They fought with certainty. Victory was measured in overwhelming fire, in fleets so vast they could strip a world of its defenses before the enemy even had time to respond. It was a doctrine refined over millennia, a simple equation that had crushed every species that dared oppose them. Against sheer numerical superiority, tactics were meaningless. The coalition had learned that the hard way. Their finest generals had devised intricate maneuvers. Their fleets had coordinated strikes with machine precision, and none of it had mattered. In the end, their fleets had been ground to dust under the Dominion's relentless advance. The largest vessel barely registered as a cruiser, and their formation was irregular, shifting subtly, as if refusing to be pinned down by standard targeting algorithms. But more than that, it was the silence. No hails, no threat, no desperate cries for diplomacy. Zatak didn't know it yet, but he was already playing by their rules. Far from the battlefront, deep within the cold void, humanity had been preparing for this moment long before the Dominion ever considered them a threat. His face was calm, impassive, betraying none of the tension that hummed beneath the surface. Around him, a team of tacticians and warfare specialists moved with quiet efficiency, each action precise, deliberate. Dominion fleet is experiencing full-spectrum disruption, a lieutenant reported. Warnet is down. Varro nodded, his gaze never leaving the holographic display hovering before him. The Dominion had always assumed that humanity was decades, if not centuries, behind in technological advancement. It was an assumption they had never bothered to verify. Why would they? Humanity had never waged war on the interstellar stage. To the Dominion, they were a curiosity at best, an afterthought at worst. That was the mistake. For decades, humanity had been studying them, not in open conflict, not in easily detectable research stations, but in silence, observing, learning, adapting. Where the Dominion relied on brute strength, humanity had built an entire doctrine around control. Electronic warfare, cyber infiltration, precision strikes. Victory was not about the size of one's fleet, but about how quickly one could render the enemy's numbers meaningless. Initiate the second phase, Varro said, voice quiet. His fleet, an instrument of absolute destruction, had just gone blind. Dominion ships that should have been overwhelming their enemy with coordinated, precision-guided salvos were now disoriented. Their targeting arrays feeding them corrupted data, their fleet coordination reduced to chaotic, individual actions. Report, Zatak demanded, his voice a low growl. Sir, our fleet-wide warnet is non-responsive. Targeting systems are failing to acquire. Local enemy signatures are phasing in and out of detection. Manual overrides are. The technician flinched as, for the first time, Dominion warships opened fire on each other. Zatak's mandibles clicked in stunned disbelief. Friendly fire, The Dominion did not make mistakes like this. And yet, here they were, as a battle cruiser's pulse cannon carved through the shielding of a nearby corvette, its targeting system clearly convinced it had engaged an enemy vessel. The humans had done this, somehow. He slammed a fist against the command interface, issuing a fleet-wide override. Cease fire. Recalibrate targeting systems. Manually use direct visual acquisition if you have to. The order went through, but Zatok knew it was too late. The human fleet moved. There was no predictable formation, no grand battle line. Instead, the human ships flowed a series of shifting, darting movements that denied standard targeting algorithms any chance to adapt. Even their energy signatures refused to stay constant, fluctuating between readings as if deliberately confounding sensor sweeps, stealth drones, signal mirages, phantom contacts. Each moment, Dominion officers tried to pin down the human fleet, only for their sensor locks to return nothing but empty void. A Dominion battleship, the relentless Dominion, detonated from within, a silent explosion that sent debris scattering across the engagement zone. Zatok's eyes narrowed. Not an external impact. This was something else. The realization struck like an electric shock. Boarding actions. But how? Human ships had never been close enough for physical contact. The Dominion's hulls were layered with quantum-reinforced plating unbreakable by anything but sustained bombardment. No elaborate transmission method. Just plain, taunting text. We've been inside your systems for 6 minutes. The bridge was silent. Then a second explosion rocked another ship. Admiral Zatok turned to his officers, his voice quiet with the weight of an unthinkable truth. They don't fight like anyone we've ever faced. Admiral Elias Varro watched from the command deck of the Indomitable, arms folded behind his back as the Dominion fleet floundered like a wounded beast. Their once impenetrable formations had collapsed into fragmented clusters of panicked ships, firing blindly at phantom targets that no longer existed. Every minute that passed tightened the noose. Every second pushed them further toward inevitable defeat. Lieutenant reported, voice steady, enemy fleet cohesion is in full disarray. Their command structures compromised. Several ships are operating in isolated pockets with no centralized coordination. It had taken years of preparation, decades of quiet, meticulous refinement. But this moment, the moment where brute force doctrine crumbled before the sheer weight of calculated, execute final phase, he ordered. On the battlefield, humanity's ships surged forward knots in a reckless charge. But in a series of surgical strikes that cut straight into the Dominion's exposed arteries, each maneuver was executed with the precision of a well-rehearsed performance. A squadron of human strike corvettes slipped between two lumbering Dominion dreadnoughts, weaving through the gaps in their confused defenses. The dreadnoughts barely had time to register what had happened before both ships ignited in a silent, cataclysmic bloom of energy. On board the Dread Harbinger, Admiral Zatok felt the tremors of another explosion ripple through the ship. His fleet was vanishing around him. But what unnerved him most was not the loss of ships, it was the methodical way in which it was happening. The humans weren't just winning. They were dismantling his forces, piece by piece, like an engineer stripping a machine down to its base components. This is something else. They're dissecting us. Zatok could no longer deny the truth. The Dominion, for all its centuries of conquest, had never prepared for something like this. Their war machine was built on the foundation of brute force, on numbers and overwhelming firepower, when their command structure had been compromised before the battle had even begun. And now, the final piece fell into place. A new set of signals flared on Zadok's display human ships, forming an intricate web around the Dread Harbinger itself. The unbreakable spearhead of every campaign for the past 50 years was now cut off. Every escape vector, every retreat corridor, had been sealed in silence. A transmission cut through the static. This time, it was not text. It was a voice.com/cold. This is Admiral Elias Varro of the United Terran Navy. Admiral Zatok, your fleet is finished. Your war is over. You have two options. Surrender or be erased. Silence. Zatok clenched his fists, staring at the battlefield. His forces were scattered wreckage. The Dominion doctrine had failed. Everything they had believed about power, about war, about how battles were won, all of it had been torn apart by an enemy they had never even considered a threat. No reinforcements would arrive in time. No counterstrike could undo the damage. Admiral Zatok, unyielding conqueror of 1,000 systems, lowered his head. All ships ... His voice was barely above a whisper. Stand down. The battlefield was silent. Wreckage from the once invincible Dominion fleet drifted aimlessly, the remnants of a war machine that had, until this moment, never known true defeat. Across the system, Dominion ships followed suit, their engines cooling. Aboard the Indomitable, Admiral Elias Varro stood at the command deck, staring at the tactical display. It still showed the sheer size of the enemy fleet, or what remained of it. Just ... surrender. He exhaled slowly. As he watched the collapse of an empire play out in real time, a strange weight settled over him. Admiral, came the voice of Captain Lin. Enemy forces are transmitting full surrender codes. The Dominion High Command has acknowledged Admiral Zatak's capitulation. Varro gave a slow nod. And our losses? Minimal, Lin replied. Less than 3% casualty rate. Humanity had not just won, they had redefined the very concept of victory. Not through brute force, not through attrition, through control. Varro turned from the holographic display and stepped toward the main viewport. Outside, the stars stretched into infinity, but they no longer seemed as distant as they once had. The Dominion had believed themselves untouchable, unchallengeable, and yet here they were crippled in a single engagement. A quiet revolution had taken place on this battlefield, one that no Dominion strategist had ever anticipated. Warfare had changed. To those who understood that a battle was won long before the first shot was ever fired. Humanity had spent decades preparing for this moment, perfecting the art of war before ever setting foot on an interstellar battlefield. And now the galaxy would have to reckon with that truth. Lin broke the silence. The coalition is already responding to the surrender. Their envoys are requesting an immediate summit to discuss new power structures. They want to know if we're going to claim occupied territory. We've just proven we're the single most dangerous force in the galaxy. The Dominion spent centuries imposing its rule through strength. Varro was silent for a long moment. Power was shifting. This battle had not just ended a war, it had reshaped the balance of the entire intergalactic order. The question now was, what came next? Would humanity use this victory as a foundation for peace? Or had they just opened the door to an era where war would be fought not with brute force, but with devastating precision? One thing was certain. The old ways were dead, and the galaxy would never be the same. In the cold vastness of space, the remnants of war drifted silently, a testament to the moment when everything changed. Across the battle-scarred void, the Dominion's once indomitable war machine lay in ruin. Their dreadnoughts, symbols of unchallenged authority, were now powerless husks, abandoned by a doctrine that had failed them. Their empire, built on centuries of brute conquest. Aboard the Indomitable, Admiral Elias Varro stood in the war room, surrounded by a holodisplay of the newly rewritten galactic order. Around him, the gathered officers of the United Terran Navy remained silent, absorbing the reality of what they had done. It wasn't just a battle they had won. It wasn't just a war they had ended. Star nations that had long feared their inevitable conquest now found themselves free, but at a cost. The balance of power was shattered, and in its place stood the unknown. Varro turned as a new transmission flickered into existence before him. A figure materialized in the blue haze of the Hololinkai Chancellor Orsic of the Orion Accord, one of the last remaining coalition leaders. Orsic's voice was measured, but behind it lay the weight of an entire galactic civilization scrambling to adjust to a new reality. It does, Varro agreed. The Chancellor exhaled, his scaled fingers flexing as if grasping for words. Their ambition. We knew the rules of the game, even if we were always doomed to lose. He paused. Now, there are no rules. Humanity has proven that war is not about numbers or strength, it is about control, about anticipation. Your forces dismantled an empire in one engagement. Varro remained impassive. Are you afraid? Orsic's jaw tensed. Wouldn't you be silenced? The Orion Accord, the surviving coalition worlds, even the remnants of the Dominion, they all feared what humanity had become. Not because they had conquered, but because they hadn't needed to. The galaxy had always understood war as a contest of attrition, a brutal test of but humans had introduced a different kind of war, one where battles were decided before they even began. And that frightened everyone. Orsic's voice lowered. You've proven that no one can match you, that you can end wars before they start. Tell me, Admiral, what happens when the next power rises? A long silence passed before Orsic spoke again. And if it is you that the galaxy fears next? Across the war room, the officers exchanged uncertain glances. The weight of Orsic's words lingered. It was true. The galaxy had changed. Or as the next empire, their power a silent threat to all who opposed them. They don't trust us. Varro exhaled. They shouldn't. The words hung in the air, heavy with truth. Trust was not given freely in the wake of a paradigm shift. A soft chime interrupted the silence in another transmission. A new holomage materialized. But it was not from any coalition leader, nor from the Dominion's remnants. Instead, a shadowed figure emerged, face obscured beneath layers of interference. A voice distorted but steady spoke. You broke the Dominion. A pause. But they were never the greatest threat. The officers tensed. Lin's fingers hovered over the security commands. Varro remained still. Who are you? The figure didn't answer. Instead, they simply said, the war you think you ended was only the first. Varro turned back to the viewport, staring out into the endless abyss of space. The galaxy had changed, but perhaps not enough.